shot, what you need in your life. New Torah movement, trying to bring it to life. Was mission for him, trying to get him to fight. They walking dead, trying to bring him to life. I got that water dive in his movie. Taking them bad, but it's ain't Scooby. Takes on the ground, we never run, we walk them down. That's how we do it, Torah move. I say my prayer, hallelujah. The prophets away, spirit did me what they face. They say that I'm going up, my mind, I better tell them just that I'm staying. I stand on my two, I'm my man. I've been on that block and I can't let that stand. And keep the Torah, baby, we got that plan. If it's down, better give them a hand. Pick them up, cause together we stand. Penny had faith in a mustard seed. Uncle had faith in a bunch of keys. We sting your flat like a bunch of bees. The prophets had left, blowing the trumpet, we put in that work. They can't get for money. New Torah moving, yeah, we keep it, they coming. But the tank told them if he try, they go run him. We walk them down like we searching for motives. We let out those scriptures, we load up the precepts. And they die right when you've been walking on the cats of Egypt. Who it down, now we are. Don't let them fool you. I say my praise, hallelujah. Chase on the ground, we never running, we just walking them down. We spitting scriptures like we busting around. Sleeping on them as a thief in the night. Praise Yah, what you need in your life. New Torah movement, trying to bring it to life. We fishing for them, trying to get them to fight. They walking dead, trying to bring them to life. I got that water dive in his movie. Taking them bad, but it's ain't Scooby. Takes on the ground, we never run, we walk them down. That's how we do it, Torah move. I say my prayer, hallelujah. In the making, say the boss of y'all up in the prophets got them shaking. I need my plate, no shrimp, no bacon. I got my fam by my side, like we racing. Had to pull it together cause I really did it, but I see us make it. I told them be patient without destruction, how we save it. Awakened by y'all, we keep praying. Baby, it's so amazing. I got that water, them they get thirsty. I got the bull with me. I got that ocean, I swim with them sharks, and there is no tool with me. Get in my heart. Hallelujah, I got that word in me. I keep that time, we moving that word like some birds in me. Never let go of that. We the devil like the flow, we walk alone with that. They bout some tanks with them. The Torah moon say yes or you ain't with them. We do it for the father, not for the pain figures. Say yes to this person, you can't go. I got that word in me. I keep that time, we moving that word like some birds in me. Never let go of that. We the devil like the flow, we walk alone with that. They bout some tanks with them. The Torah moon say yes or you ain't with them. We do it for the father, not for the pain figures. Say yes to this person, you can't go. Teaching them young ones the bus gun that said that them young girls that said can't them sell us. Just said that we shipping is real, that might make that. We waking up people they dead in their sleep. They walk all they eat but don't hear it, no see. They lost in the sea. I came off that flower, they hustle, they grind me, they stab you in your back, say they love you, they fly me, don't try me, I'm ready for war. I keep that sword, lay down that spirit so low, raise it back off on the floor. The weapon is really hitting, showing mercy, cause it's really feeling. But it's haters in it, cause they wanna hit me. Know the Father's in me, exposing their way, showing they wicked who follow they with them. I'm handing the business, cause I gotta get it though. They die for the system, it's bad by the serpent. They want me stay dry like a surgeon, want blood on my hand, wanna see murder. They took it by the devil, but I do not serve it though. Step on the head of the snake, I might hurt them. Hurt they been lurking, I'm searching. Beat don't play no. And they got right on the move when they come against the word like a K-Go. I got that word in me. I keep that time, we moving that word like some birds in me. Never let go of that. We the devil like the flow, we walk alone with that. They bout some tanks with them. The Torah moon say yes or you ain't with them. We do it for the father, not for the pain figures. Say yes to this person, you can't go. I got that word in me. I keep that time, we moving that word like some birds in me. Never let go of that. We the devil like the flow, we walk alone with that. They bout some tanks with them. The Torah moon say yes or you ain't with them. We do it for the father, not for the pain figures. Say yes to this person, you can't go. We be that glory, that spirit, he pouring. We own it, that bread that from heaven. We got it, you want it, all night up on the word. We be back up in the morning, got that water like a river keep flowing. Protect all the young ones, cause they minds still growing. Show the mercy to the old, got a wise man wrong. Memorable upon.
Shalom, shalom. Peace and blessings to you, family. Giving all praises to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yahweh is his name. Peace and blessings to all those who have tuned in. Right now, I'm going to be very brief. I just wanted to bring out a few things, just touch on some information, just do a part two or a follow up to finish off our discussion topic on Joseph. Joseph in the Bible, the son of Israel, the son of Jacob, one of the youngest son, I believe, of Jacob in the scriptures, according to the book of Bereshit, the book of Genesis. And so I just wanted to touch on a few things and open up some eyes. Peace and blessings to you, brother. KOT is in the building. Peace and blessings to you, family. I see Indigenous Black Man was with us earlier. Shout out to Dasharab. Shalom. Shalom, family. Peace and blessings. As you come in, please hit that like button, like, share, and subscribe. Let someone know that we are on the air. And we're going to be touching on a few things. Today, I'm going to get right into it. And y'all see what it is. Joseph, the Israelite, Imhotep, right? Last week, we talked about, in part one, we talked about Joseph, the Israelite, Serapius. And we're going to be talking about, again, Joseph, the Israelite, Imhotep. And it's very important to really touch on these topics and bring these things out because we see so much going on in the community about this and that, about how this person was only an eponymous ancestor, which they somehow have determined or defined in this community as meaning not to be someone who was actually a flesh and blood person or real person. But eponymous does not mean that at all. It does not mean that the person did not exist. Doesn't mean that at all. And we're going to look up those terms before we end this show on what is an eponym and what does eponymous means in these particular discussions. We're also going to be touching on why is it that Joseph, if he was not a real person, right? If he was not a real person, why is he connected to so many of our ancient cultures? Why the various cultures, not just the Israelite culture, but why does many various cultures talk about this particular individual? Why do they pay him homage? There is a reason for it, right? And we're going to touch on these things, but we're going to talk about some things, just show some comparison, contrast, some things that we cannot dismiss simply based on what we do not know, right? Simply based on what we do not know, right? The absence of evidence is not proof. That's a fact, right? And they've pushed so hard in this particular community, especially when it comes to things that we find in the Torah and the biblical narrative, or when we talk about biblical history, biblical archaeology, or biblical studies. They want you to stray away from their argument. They want you to think and feel that is a cop-out statement, or that is a term when they don't feel you can adequately explain what it is they have limited knowledge about in the first place, right? But we do understand that it is a fact that the absence of evidence is not proof, right? So the absence of evidence, specifically speaking, archaeological evidence, does not mean someone or something did not exist or was not real. Even when you use the term myth or mythos, right, or mythology, myth and mythology or mythos does not always equate to something being created or made up. Does not mean that is not real, or that what it's referring to is something that did not happen, right? I often use these as an example. I'll use it again when we talk about Michael Jordan, his exploits on the basketball court. They are things that are talked about in that have been mythicized, right? People will tell you Michael Jordan could fly, right? Well, we know that's not the truth. We've seen Michael Jordan do many things in various animated concepts that still hold to the fact that he was yet a basketball player. But we know that the Michael Jordan of Space Jam was not a real personification. It was not a real flesh and blood personification of him, simply because they drew or created an animated cartoon of him in the series. But we do know Michael Jordan was still a real person, right? So we have to really think about these things and keep in mind that when we're having these conversations, peace and blessings to you, our beautiful sister Cassandra Mensah. Thank you for being in the building, sis. We have to keep these things in mind. Don't let people fool you about the terms that they use. Eponymous. Eponymous does not equate to something not being real or made up. Right? That's a trick. Right? It's disinformation. It's false. They say, oh, he's just an eponymous ancestor. Doesn't mean he wasn't real. Oh, this is a myth or a legend. A myth or a legend does not mean it was not real, or the person was not real. It's so very small-minded and intellectually dishonest to simply try to pigeonhole what we know about particular things and certain informations. Just keeps it encapsulated inside of confirmation bias, right? So we know these things are not always true, right? So even when we talk about things that are legends, right? You know, those things don't equate to something being false. Like, we have to stop letting people place us in these boxes when we have these discussions, right? Again, the absence of evidence is not proof. Shout out to you, Dominic Doolittle. Peace and blessings to you, family. Right? So the absence of evidence, again, is not proof. Let's remember that. Right? They talk about there is no physical his archaeological evidence for Yeshua, Jesus, Yahushua, right? There is no archaeological evidence directly tied to his personage, but the absence of evidence is not proof. Why do we believe in a historical Yeshua, Jesus, Yahushua person? Because we have many attestations of people who were writing during the same time, the same era. We have people who were living, who were writing about him, who were living during the time that he was living. Doesn't matter how you want to dismiss it. It's simply, these are simply statements of facts, right? And when we talk about, again, what are sources and primary sources, we have people who were writing during the time that Yeshua lived that understand and claim that he was a real person, right? Even though we have scholars who talk about Paul, that Paul was a real person. No one denies that Paul was a real person, right? We have at least out of his 13 written epistles, I should say, Shalaki epistles in the biblical narrative, that at least 7 of them can be authenticated that came directly from the hand of Paul himself. Scholars do not argue this. At least 7 of his letters are authentic. So we don't argue against whether or not Paul was a real person, but we do know this, that Paul, during his lifetime, lived and was contemporary during the time of Yeshua. Now watch this. The lie about the argument that they make against Paul is that, well, Paul never met Jesus. Okay, idiots. If Paul never met Jesus, no problem. But why was Paul even involved in the narratives that we see in his epistles? Why? Because he was persecuting the Christians. Who were the Christians he were persecuting? People who were followers of this person called Yeshua, Yahushua, Jesus the Christ. Paul, in one of his authenticated letters, mentions James, the brother of Jesus. We also have an extant source in Josephus that also talks about James the Just, or James the brother of Jesus, right? And it's mentioned that way specifically to tell us that this was a sibling. This was a person who was considered to have known Jesus have grown up with him, who was familiar with him. They came from the same household, right? No real historian argues against that. But you have a lot of people who push a lot of this information in these spaces that we're involved in, simply because they have a confirmation bias towards what we know as information that can be proven, right? The proof of arguments that whether or not a person was real or not does not always hinge on archaeological evidence. It does not, right? We can even look at other things like Homer. He talks about the city of Troy. He talks about the Trojan horse. Homer wrote that, but for hundreds of years, almost thousands of years, everyone thought that it was a myth, that it was just something written or embellished in the story of Homer, until in the 1940s, where a German archaeologist did what? Excavated and discovered the city of Troy. And so now all of a sudden, Troy is now added to the archaeological record. We've done this in the biblical narrative when it talks about Joseph and the Israelites coming out of Egypt, how they marched upon the city of Ai. Well, that was considered to be just a biblical embellishment until what? Until they discovered the actual city of Ai. So simply because things don't always fit a person's particular confirmation bias doesn't make it eponymous, which doesn't mean that it did not exist. Doesn't mean that it is mythos. Doesn't mean that it didn't exist. Because it was legendary doesn't mean that it did not exist. These are all false teachings and arguments to sway you away from the truth. Away from the truth. Listen, even when it comes to understanding the Bible itself, let me explain something to people when you're reading the biblical text, right? We always teach here that it is first of all a wisdom text, right? It is a wisdom text, right? And in this particular wisdom text, we have to understand who's writing in this wisdom text, right? When it comes to the biblical narrative, right? Peace and blessings to you, Professor X. Glad to see you in the building. We have to understand that everything we're reading from the Torah, the Tanakh, which is the Hebrew Bible, Genesis to Malachi, the Tanakh, all the way even through the New Testament, which picks back up again in the book of Matthew, and not in chronological order, but from the book of Matthew to the book of Revelation, is written by one particular group of people. And those particular groups of people come out of the tribe of Judah, right? They come out of the tribe of Judah. There are no northern kingdom, or what we refer to as the 10 lost tribes, right? They're not writing themselves. Their stories are being told and told and told again by the Judite priests. We have to understand that. So we have Judah, who's writing about themselves and their history, right? The tribe of Judah. And they're also writing about the history of the northern kingdoms. You see? When you talk about Ezekiel, when you talk about Enoch, when you talk about those books, when you talk about who's the other prophet? When you talk about Samuel, when you talk about all these different people in these books prior to the Judite kings' writings, their stories are being retold by the tribe of Judah. We have to understand that, right? We have to understand that when you're reading, these stories are being retold by them. And so that's why you see the continuation of this motif as it's written as it is relayed to us from the book of Genesis all the way to the book of Revelations. That's why you can see a continuity through it, because they have a understanding that the royalty, that the proper rulers of Israel, right, the proper rulership of the kingdom of Israel, right, it has to come through the tribe or the line of Judah, because this is the Judean king, the Judite kings, not Judean, but these are the Judite kings who are writing. It's them who's writing. You see? So they often talk about the northern kingdoms or of the dispersed or of the diaspora. That's why they refer to it that way. Those who were of the flock, those the lost sheep of Israel. Why? Because Judah did not consider themselves to be lost. They're only referring to the lost tribes of Israel, those northern tribes, those northern kingdoms who were dispersed into the four corners of the earth. Now, the four corners of the earth is not referring to the globe. They didn't have a concept of a global earth. So when they say the four corners of the earth, they're not talking about the four corners of the globe. They're talking about the four corners of the earth, or the known kingdoms to them at that time. Just the known kingdoms, which would be Egypt, Assyria, Ashkelon, those kingdoms, those different kingdoms. So when you talk about the four corners of the earth, that's what they're referring to. They're not talking about in a global sense. We have to remember that when you're reading the Bible, and that goes from the very beginning of the book. And if you study the New Testament all the way to Revelation, this is being written by the tribe of Judah and their priesthood, right? And how they viewed the world. And how they viewed, this is a Greek term, eschatology. This is how they reviewed the end times, or the end of the world, or the promise of the coming Messiah. This is why from the book of Genesis all the way through Revelation, they're still looking, it appears they're still waiting on the return of the Messiah. This is why they don't believe, even though King David came out of Judah, they make references to the kingdom being reset up again on earth through the line or through the loins of King David. They did not believe that King David himself would actually be the one to return, although that was an argument, but the majority didn't believe that. Why? Because as you read through each and every text, all the way to the book of Malachi and the Tanakh, they're all still looking for this Messiah. Even after King David has died, they're still looking for this Messiah. And so we have to remember that once we're studying the text. But what I want to get into is a little bit about Joseph, right? Or Yusuf, right? Even if you study today, even in the areas of ancient Kemet where they talk about certain areas where they talk about the Fayum or the Fayum Desert region, right? The Fayum Desert region. The Fayum Desert region was once recorded as a barren land, just desert land, right? But how the story goes is that the land was irrigated, or portions of the rivers and portions, I believe portions of the river, certain rivers were diverted into this desert region land, and it became a flourishing and prosperous oasis. The funny thing about the Fayum region is that it's named after Joseph. Joseph in the biblical narrative, Joseph of the Bible. Y'all have heard the play before, Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. Joseph, the youngest son of Israel, the Fayum region makes and gives great homage to Joseph. Why would they do that if they didn't think that this eponymous ancestor was a real person? They still attribute the Fayum desert region in its flourish is no longer a desert, but the Fayum oasis, they still attribute that to Joseph in the Bible. Right? Why would a bunch of non-believers, of people who didn't believe in him at the time, why would they do that? Why would the Arabs do it? Why would the Egyptians do it? They still do it today. It's still there, still named after him. They still pay homage to Joseph in that area. Why? Why? If he was simply, as many people in this community like to say, just one of those nomadic, worthless Hebrews or Israelites that nobody paid attention to, or all they had to offer was chicken scratch. We've heard some of the ne'er-do-wells out here in the community make that claim, right? But let me share something with you guys, right? And I'm not going to be long. This is going to be brief. I just wanted to finish up this part 2 so I can move on to the next lesson here. We're going to do that. Let me make that bigger. Make that a little bit bigger for you guys to see it. Please hit that like button, like, share, and subscribe. Oh, I think we're good right there. I think we're good right here. It looks pretty good to me. Please hit that like button. Please like, share, subscribe. Authentically Erica, it's a pleasure to see you in the building today. Peace and blessings to you, sis. Thank you so much. Peace and blessings to you. All right, so we can see what it is. Yusuf the Israelite. Imhotep. Now, this is a question here, and this is part 2, just as we did with Serapius. And we're just going to show some things. We're going to talk about some of the correlating or parallel motifs that we see between the two, right? We're going to talk about some things probably in a way you've never heard it spoken of before, right? And then we're going to talk about why the understanding of this is important, right? We have to get to that in each one of these lessons, even when we're doing this work. Why is it important to us today? Right? So let's talk about it. All right. I think you should be able to see that. Let me see if I can make that a little bit bigger so y'all can see what I'm reading a little bit better. See if I can make it a little bit bigger. There we go. I think that's a lot bigger. You should be able to do that. So let's read a little bit here. It says Yusuf and Imhotep, right? And as you can see here in this graphic here, if you look real closely, you'll see in this area here, this is the location of Saqqara in Egypt, or where we see one of the oldest structures, which is where located is the Temple of Jasher in Saqqara, right? Which is a step, sort of like not really a step pyramid, but they call it a mastaba, right? It's where it's certain plateaus or like large steps that sort of are wider at its base and smaller as you reach its apex, right? So it doesn't necessarily appear to be a pyramid itself, but it's a mastaba is how they refer to it, right? And if you look closely here, you'll see where I'm pointing here, down at the bottom in your lower left-hand corner, it says the Fayum Oasis, right? Or Lake Maurice, right? Or Crocodile Lake, this area here. Originally, this was just all desert here. There was no water here. You see this greenery here. This is what they refer to as the oasis, right? This greenery here. This didn't exist at a point in time in history. but somehow it's connected to both Imhotep as well as Joseph or Joseph. Now let's read it. Arab historians not only attributed the canal project to Joseph, and when they talk about the canal project, they talk about this water right here that goes through Midian, Dabshur, Memphis, Saqqara, Abu Sur, Giza, Cairo, Heliopolis, Abu Rohash, the Wadi Natrum from lower and areas of lower Egypt. This sort of it goes into this place here. Now, you might not can see it, but it's a little blue line right here that flows into the Nile and into these particular cataracts, right? That's the cataracts is where this river actually branches off, right? Those are called cataracts, right? And so there's a little blue water line here that flows from this lake, that flows from this river into this lake, right, which created this oasis, right? And it's this particular project that the Arabs themselves, throughout their history, attributed this canal to project to Joseph, but reported its circumstances. It was historians related when Joseph was more than 100 years old, but still held a high position in the Egyptian court. The other viziers, right, those are overseers or rulers in ancient Kemet, to the pharaoh. The other viziers and court officials who were envious of Joseph persuaded the pharaoh that to remain venerated, right, or to keep Joseph in high esteem, even in his old age, he should not be allowed to rest on his laurels. They still wanted him to prove himself and not just ride out the popularity of interpreting the pharaoh's dreams, right, according to the biblical narrative and some extant sources that we're going to get into. We're going to talk about that. It says he must prove again his abilities. When the pharaoh agreed, the vizier suggested an impossible project to convert the desert into a fertile area. Inspired by God, Joseph confounded his detractors by succeeding. He dug feeder canals and created a vast artificial lake in 1,000 days. And this is that lake. And here is the source for that. Joseph, an Israelite in Egypt, .wordpress, and you can read about it, right? You can go to it and talk about that if you want to just look on that information. Matter of fact, let me click on it just so you can see what it looks like. Right. This is what it'll look like. And let's read a little bit of it here. And it's just information we're reading here. It says, could Joseph and Imhotep have been the same person? If Joseph and Imhotep were the same person, Joseph would have died in the 4th or 5th year of the famine. Joseph would have been responsible for embalming and burying Joshua and constructing his mastaba. So it talks about that, right? But I'm going to come back to this. All right. And this is what it will look like, just so you guys can see it, what I'm reading from. Right. It's just information. Right. But what we can't do is dismiss the fact that Joseph is connected very much so to a lot of ingenuity and innovative, as well as still in the case of both Imhotep and Serapis, to curing the famine that occurred in ancient Kemet. We showed that and talked about that on last week. The veneration of Joseph, we see this again here. It's still being maintained even in the veneration of Imhotep, right? So let's go back here. We'll show something else. Let's go back to our slides. Right, let's go back to our slides. Get right back to where we were. Right. And again, let's go to our next slide on this. Right here, Yosef and Imhotep, Egypt and the Semites, Part 2, the Second Intermediate Period. And this is a fact paper, pages 10 and 11, by Samuel Kerensky, right? All rights reserved, right? All rights reserved. And we're going to show what you see here are some boules or signet rings, right? Or boules of high officials. And we're going to talk about some of these things, right? We're going to read what this paper says. So let's go into this source really quickly. Share my screen on that. And let's talk about it. Right. And this is from the Hebrew History Federation, right? And it talks about Egypt and the Semites, Part 2, the Second Intermediate Period. Copyright Samuel Kerensky, all rights reserved. And we clearly see here two boules or signet rings, right? And we're going to talk about those within here, right? And it talks about, in this particular breakdown, here it is again, Egypt and the Semites, right? Part 2, the Second Intermediate Period. It talks about Egyptian progress to stagnation, Manetho in Egyptian history, the Second Intermediate Period, the Bar, Yusuf or Joseph Canal, Amu, technology and culture, the adulteration of history, and then his notes, right? So let's talk about this, right? It's okay. We're going to do a little bit of reading, but it's okay. It says, Egyptian progress to stagnation, immigrants from Southwest Asia with Semitic characteristics established villages in the Nile Delta and Fayum regions of lower northern Egypt. And then they give us a date from 5500 to 3100 BCE, as was seen in fact paper 10-1. They introduced husbandry. Now, this is what they're saying that the Semites introduced into ancient Kemet. They introduced husbandry and agrimony, right? And this has to do with agriculture and planting, right? And different things like that. Husbandry and pastoral work, husbandry and agrimony. The twin foundations of civilization. So you mean to tell me that in this particular paper here, what they're saying here is that husbandry and agrimony was introduced into ancient Kemet. It was introduced into ancient Kemet. It was not something that was created or founded by ancient Kemet. They were not pastoralists. They were not agriculturalists. We know this for a fact as it stands anyway. These are the twin foundations of civilization, right? It's difficult to build an argument for what a civilization is, right? Or what is the burgeoning pieces of a foundation without husbandry and without pastoralism, domestication of animals, and agriculture. You really be hard pressed to call something a real true civilization. Oftentimes when we hear these words, civilizations, you have to have certain things present in order to define something as a civilization. It has to have writing, language, its own individual land. You have to have some type of agriculture and some type of domestication of animals. These things must be had. It must be shown in order to argue what a civilization is. This paper alludes to the fact that these things were introduced into ancient Kemet by the Asiatics or the Semitic people, as evidenced by the wide variety of Asiatic plants and animals raised in their settlements. The agricultural tools employed by these villagers and other technological and cultural attributes they possess contrasted sharply with the hunter-gatherer culture of the indigenous Stone Age populations of Egypt of the period. So you clearly see the contrast, and this is why this argument can be made intellectually, is that Kemet was more so a hunter-gatherer culture, right? which was indigenous, or which was the basis of a lot of Stone Age populations, which we see in ancient Kemet, right? But what we didn't see until Semitic peoples introduced them, or Asiatic Semitic peoples introduced them, they produced their plant life, which is agriculture and husbandry, and their way and how they domesticated animals. That was introduced into the hunter-gatherer culture alongside of what we've seen in ancient Egypt. So we know it did not come from them, right? I told you there's a lot of things that has to go into what a civilization is. And then we have to look at key points in the material cultures of these people to determine what they gathered from other cultures. As F. Wendorf pointed out, this new population of Asiatic peoples instituted a cultural foundation in Lower Egypt on which all subsequent Egyptian civilization was based. Right? And they give the source on that. Matter of fact, let me go down here and see if I can find it real quick for you. Just in case I don't get to it. This is a story he uses. F. Wendorf et al. Egyptian Prehistory. Some New Concepts on Science, 1969. Pages 1161 to 1171. Right? This is where that comes from. That's the source there, used there. It says the inhabitants of upper or upriver or southern Egypt began to absorb some of the Asiatic agronomic or agricultural or agronomic and technological attributes from the Semitic traders, passing by up the Nile on the way to Nubia. So see, it tells us that these Asiatics, they were heading toward Nubia. And in heading toward Nubia, they made stops in Upper Kemet. And because of trade and access of the Nile from these cultures, these Southwest or these Western or Asiatic cultures coming from the Mesopotamian region down into ancient Kemet, as we see on the B'nai Hassan mural, right? We see all of those Amu or Asiatics coming in, and they're bringing with them agriculture. You see them bringing in grain. If you look on the walls of the B'nai Hassan mural, you'll see these motifs there, right? So they're bringing these things into the hunter-gatherer culture alongside the hunter-gatherer culture of the ancient Egyptians. You see this? And it says this traffic became frequent at the end of the pre-dynastic period. That's very important, people. So we're talking about an influx of technological advances of husbandry and archaeology being brought into ancient Kemet by the Semitic characteristics, by Asiatics, from as early as 5500 to 3100 BCE. That's all in pre-dynastic Kemet. So when we're talking about, so a lot of times when we talk about pre-dynastic Kemet ends and begins where we see Narmer come onto the scene, right? And if you ever looked at Narmer, and he's going to talk about this a little bit later, when we talk about Narmer, it is Narmer who unified Upper and Lower Egypt, right? Some of them talk about him in a mythical type of source. But what do we see on the Narmer, what they call the Narmer palette? The Narmer palette was simply a palette used for makeup, right? Usually used for makeup. But on the motifs of the Narmer palette, some things are very interesting on the Narmer palette. You see a mix of both pre-dynastic Kemetic motifs as well as Asiatic motifs. Why do you see the combination there on the Narmer palette? Why? Because we know that clearly during the time of pre-dynastic Egypt or Kemet, as we see here, that they had a close relationship, that they were trading. You see, they were trading. These things are very important to understand, especially when we began to get into the biblical narrative in a lot of things that people say. So when we start talking about who borrowed from who and who borrowed from what, well, where do you make that line? You see? Because what we understand is not that only their agriculture and technology was being traded, but what's also is being traded: goods and services, wisdom, teaching. It's being traded. It's being passed around, passed along. Women, wives are intermarrying with these other cultures. They're being traded back and forth. Also, young men servants and men slaves. These people were being traded back and forth as well, and they brought their cultures with them. And some of them, as we clearly see, based on the normal palette, that cultural identity was fused. So you see, ancient Kemet and ancient Asiatic source and renderings and characteristics were infused. They were infused. We have to keep this stuff in mind. So when we hear a lot of these fallacious arguments that talk about what the Bible stole from ancient Kemet, all of that stuff is false. It's made up, and there's no evidence to prove that. None of it at all whatsoever. None of it at all whatsoever. So these are a lot of the things that we have to understand. Now, can we show some syncretisms? Of course we can. So we were just talking about things being infused, some syncretism, some things being smashed together, not time periods, as some one person likes to say, not time periods, but cultures are being smashed together and developing new ones out of it, new ideas, new thoughts, new understandings, right? So we know that during the time of pre-dynastic Kemet, these Semitic people or traders were passing up the Nile on the way to Nubia. This traffic became frequent at the end of the pre-dynastic Kemet. Pre-dynastic Kemet, they call it the Gerzian period, from 3500 to 3170 BCE. It's called the Gerzian period. As a result, the Egyptians began to emerge from the Stone Age into the I can never say that, Chalcolithic period. That's when you see copper also now becoming more important in trade, in the economy of the ancient Egyptians. Why copper? Why copper? Because we know the Asiatics had always been dealing with copper. And even as we get into the biblical narrative, we understand that the Israelites, or these Asiatics, I should say, at times they were very heavy and attributed a lot of their understanding in ancient Kemet and in the Levant region to copper mining. It's closely tied to the Asiatic people, right? So we see this fusion of a material culture now, right? The Egyptians come out of just the Stone Age. They're brought out of the Stone Age, not by their own intellect, but by an infusion. But by an infusion of Asiatics who are bringing this technology in with them. This is what we have to understand. And the problem is that because many people have this sort of Afrocentric type of argument that everything that has any potence on the side of history has to come from strictly African soil, right? Because what they would like to try to make you do is try to make you think that people in Mesopotamia or people in the Asiatic or Western Asiatics or East Asia, that those people somehow were not melanated people. But we know through DNA research that they do carry heavy Afrocentric DNA, right? And we know this has been going on for thousands of years, where we have people, especially when we talk about the Natufians, we see the Natufians migrated out of what we believe is the continent of Africa and into the Levant region between 9,000 and 12,000 BCE. They migrated out of Africa into the Levant region, people of African descent. So we have to keep these things in mind, right? You have to be aware of these things when you hear people make such fallacious and salacious claims, especially against the biblical narrative. I keep telling people they don't know what they're reading. They don't. They do not. Right? So let's continue. So irrigation began to be employed, enabling the arid region to sustain a larger population that had heretofore been possible, which means it had not been possible, right? So in other words, because of the influx or the migration of Semitic people into the ancient Kemet or ancient Egyptian region, they now began to be able to farm the desert land. Why? Because they brought the technology of irrigation into Kemet. And without it, they could not have built these great, fantastic palaces, because you needed a water system. You needed that technology to even build the pyramids. You needed that technology to build the mirrors. So even archaeologists will tell you that the temple is Saqqara or the Zosha temple or the Mastaba temple only dates between 2650 and 2500 BCE. They tell you that is the oldest structure, not the Pyramid of Giza. They do not date it that old, right? They don't do that. But you hear people tell you, oh, no, we were there doing this and doing that. Those structures were not. Right? Egyptian overlords ensconced enclaves along the Nile also benefited from the imposition of tribute. The Nile traffic increased. So in other words, the Egyptians got smart. They said, okay, y'all want to travel our Nile? We're going to impose a tariff on you, a tax. So in order to travel up and down our Nile, you got to pay us. You got to pay us a toll. So this is what this is saying. So as Nile traffic increased, as agricultural areas widened, and as the population burgeoned, a new Egyptian social order arose, in which power was wielded by an ever-growing hierarchy. As overlords gained power, they took to raiding each other, right? So these Egyptian overlords basically were pretty much were priesthoods. They're saying overlords, but these Kemetic priesthoods, these different priesthoods, became the controllers of the Nile traffic and the goods that passed through them. So they began to overtax people. They began to charge people higher prices, and as they got richer and controlled the import and export of the Nile, they grew in power and political power. This is what we have to understand, especially when we get into this understanding of what we are reading in the biblical narrative. See, oftentimes people don't take the time to show that there was something going on before what we read in the biblical narrative. Remember, the biblical narrative only deals with the plight of the tribe of Judah, because they're the ones that are writing the history for the northern kingdoms. You see? Let me put it to you like this. This is going to be a bad example, but it's the best example I'm going to be able to give you right now for this. It's as if you had the Crips and the Bloods, right? These are two notorious gangs, the Crips and the Bloods. What if all of the Bloods were somehow taken up by the police, incarcerated, or put into captivity, or sent about into various countries outside of their normal places here that we would normally find them in certain areas here in the country, right? And then at a particular period of time, what happens is that now the Crips, who were not taken and placed into captivity to a degree, but are still being oppressed by the same system, but they're allowed to go into a different region of land, but they're not exported like the Bloods were. So what ends up happening is that now the Crips begins to write their own history, but they also include the history of the Bloods, but through the lens and the eyes of the Crips. You see, this is what the tribe of Judah did with the dispersion and the captivity of the northern kingdoms. They began to write their own history and own plight, but they also wrote about the northern kingdoms who were dispersed, or those of the diaspora, through the lenses of the tribes of the people of Judah. The tribes of Judah, the Judean kings and scribes. So this is what happens in the biblical narrative. That's all what we're reading. Right? Hey, Sister Cassandra, I'm from Chicago, so I know all about the Black Peastone Ranges and the Vice Lords. Trust me, exactly. And that's probably would have been a better example. I'm from Chicago, been born and raised around them all my life. So I know exactly what you're saying, Sister Cassandra. But that's absolutely correct. Right? That's exactly what happened. Right? So one such warlord attained the right to wear the white crown of Upper Egypt. That is to rule over all of Upper Egypt. Eventually, he became powerful enough to raid and conquer Lower Egypt. He donned the symbol of this conquest by donning the red crown. So in ancient Kemetic hieroglyphs, oftentimes when you see a person or a figure wearing a red and white crown, infuse this one is both red and white, two crowns into one. This is usually a depiction of Narmer, right, or of Lower Egypt, and commemorated the event on the so-called Narmer palette, right? And you guys have seen the Narmer palette before. I don't know if there's a picture of it in here, but just let me show you guys exactly what I'm talking about really quickly. Right, let me show you the Narmer palette. What we're talking about here. This is the Narmer palette. Let me put it right here. Let me do this. Let me show you the Narmer palette. Right. And this is from the Center of Public Art and History. Right. Palette of King Narmer, Dr. Amy Calvert. And here it is. Right. Here it is. This is Narmer. And here he's wearing the Atif crown. I believe that you call that the Atif crown. Right. He's holding the mace there. And here he's holding the head of a Semitic person, an Asiatic. Right. And here he is again, trampling them under his feet in great defeat. Here's the hawk, or the symbol of Heru, right? A horse, right? You also see something very familiar here. You also see the bull head here, right? Now, what many people don't realize is that oftentimes when you see this bull head on the Narmer palette, I believe that it is referring to the bull, or the bull L, right? Coming from this Asiatic place. But also, what do we see here, right? On these motifs, right? We see him here wearing a different crown. You see that crown? He's wearing a different crown there. Here are the people that he's defeated, the Asiatics he's defeated. He's being led into ancient Kemet. And look how larger he is than the rest of them. But here's the part here that I want to take you to. These motifs here are they're called cephalopods. They have tiger-like bodies, right? They have these tiger-like bodies and tiger-like faces, but they have the necks of snakes. This is an Asiatic rendering, right? This is an Asiatic rendering. So why would Narmer have this Asiatic motif infused here on the Narmer palette? And this is the Narmer palette again, because in this circle part right here is where they would place the makeup. Let me show. I'm not showing it right now. To show it right here, right? Should be able to see it. Here, you see here he's wearing two different crowns, one here and one here, right? He's wearing one crown here, another crown here. Here's Heru or Horus, some say, or the falcon, and he's holding a snake, right? Which is showing the defeat of, I believe, Apophis or the snake, right? Right? Or this, what do you call it? Symbolism of Set, right? And we do know that Set or Seth was a Asiatic, part of the Asiatic pantheon of deities, right? And so this just shows his defeat of that. And then again, you see him holding the hair of the Asiatics, and the Asiatics being trampled under Narmer's feet. And here he's wearing a different crown. This is him here. He's wearing a different crown. And then you see him being led into a very particular scene where he's being led into parts of Kemet where Asiatics are have been settled and have taken up as ruling those lands. But he's defeated these Asiatics. This is not Narmer going into Asia or Mesopotamia. This is him going down into parts of Kemet where these Asiatics whom he's defeated and cut off their heads, whom he's defeated here, he's marched on them, right? So as he unifies both Upper and Lower Egypt, he has to deal with these Asiatics that are already in the land. Now, this is at the beginning of the foundation of what they right after the pre-dynastic Kemet, right, or the beginning of the dynasties, right? And so again, here you see this here, right? This is the palette of King Narmer from Hierakonpolis in Egypt, pre-dynastic, and this is dated 3000 to 2920 BCE, right? And another thing that I always notice, because what it does is it shows a lot of motifs here, but what it doesn't show us, it doesn't show us any pyramids. It doesn't show us any mirrors on the Narmer palette. That's just my observation, right? Not saying that it's supposed to, but if they're showing all this iconography, I believe that if pyramids would have actually existed between this time, it would have been here. But I do believe that the mastaba structure, 2650 BCE, is the oldest structure, right? So let's go back. let's go back to our presentation here. So let's go back to our presentation. We'll go back into that. I'm going to share my screen. All right. You should be seeing the two bullets from Samuel Kerensky. Let's just go back into that, what we were reading. Go back into that and just continue on a little bit in this reading. It says, talking about Narmer, right? I just showed you the Narmer palette. It says there were probably many raiders of the Norman villages, such as the Scorpion of Legend, right? Or the Narmer of the palette. It's talking about the Scorpion King, right? Or the Narmer of the palette, or Menes. Some people have attributed Menes being Narmer, right? You have some who have attributed Narmer and Menes to be the same person, but to also be that of the biblical Nimrod, right? The biblical Nimrod. So some people connect Menes, Narmer, and Nimrod as being the same person. It's being the same person because Menes is known to be the first king of the first Egyptian dynasty, and so does Narmer, right? And if you understand in here, and if you understand that the people of ancient Kemet used a bi or sometimes tri-consonantal root of words in which you can take the naming conventions of these things, such as Narmer, and if you took out the vowels, you have N, R, right? You have N, R, M, right? You have N, R, M, R, right? And some people, linguistics have connected or attempts to connect that name Narmar to the name of Nimrod, right? So this is what you would, this is how often they make that connection, along with him also being considered the first kings of the Egyptian dynasty. And then if you talk about Genesis chapter 10, where it talks about how Nimrod was a great hunter before the Lord, it doesn't mean that the Most High looked favorably upon him. That means that Narmer stood in rebellion. He stood in great rebellion against the Most High, right? And so we see some of these same connections and motifs. And so it says that these characters may have been one and the same is up for open debate. According to Egyptian lore, however, the unification of Egypt took place under Menes. For a period of 1,200 years, from Menes, 3100 BCE, to the 12th dynasty to 1900 BCE, Egypt's resources were committed to the centralization of power, to the deification of successive kings, and to their glorification and to that of their underlings. Great monuments were erected, and other were erected, great statues were carved, great palaces and elaborate tombs were filled with exquisite art and artifacts. So basically saying between these period here and up until this period here, this is where you got a lot of the building of those mirrors, of those pyramids. Could that have been done over the course of about 1,000 years, 2,000 years? Why not? Right? You had deification of successive kings, and to their glorification and to that of their underlings. Great monuments were erected, great statues were carved, great palaces and elaborate tombs were filled with exquisite art and artifacts. The Egyptian populace was taxed to the limit to maintain hordes of slaves. Now, when people tell you that there were no slaves in ancient Kemet, they're lying. There's no way to skirt around it. It's false. We already know this for a fact. They had slaves, right? And freemen were subjected to indenture during agricultural off seasons. That's right. Under oligarchical rule, however, creativity was stifled. Egypt maintained mired in the Chalcolithic Age, while Southwest Asia passed on from the early to the Middle Bronze Age. You see? So a lot of the advanced technologies that you see in ancient Kemet was being done by the people of Asia, in Southwest Asia, in the Asiatics, in Mesopotamia. That doesn't mean that these people were not melanated people. But you have people who are so Afrocentric in their argument because they equate everything in Africa. Everything has to come out of Africa because that is the only way that you can equate it or give it the equivalency of it being created by a black race of people. That is wholly false. Black races populated the entire earth. Great point, Sister Cassandra. Also, Nimrod is connected with the Hebrew word meaning rebel. That's a fact. So when the Bible says he, just to go back a little bit, when the scripture says he was a great hunter before the Lord, that means that he was in rebellion. And the scripture tells us rebellion is that of witchcraft, right? But let's continue. It says the rich accoutrements of early dynasty tombs persuaded historians that a period of prosperity had ensued. How easily does royal gold blind ostensibly sensible scientists to the facts? The luxury wares from royal tombs and enhanced museum halls and leave the impression that such opulence reflects a glorious condition of Egyptian society. The mirage is persistent, despite the fact that it is clear that far from being a period of progress and prosperity, the welfare of Egypt and the evolution of technology were being adversely affected. See, again, it goes back to the same age-old adage that says everything that glitters is not gold. Simply because you had these tombs by these ancient people in Kemet filled with artworks and glitter doesn't mean that they were advancing in technology, that they were advancing in sciences, that they were advancing in the arts. It does not mean that. And actually, if you study a lot of ancient Egyptian pottery, you're clear that it came from an area called Shechem. It came from the Levant region. They found the kilns in the furnaces where the Egyptian pottery was being made. All that beautiful Egyptian pottery was being made in Shechem, which is an area of quote what we call in the Bible near Canaan land. Right? It was in that Levant region. Right? So, you know, a lot of what you see here doesn't really put the people of ancient Kemet during this time period in a very technical, logical discussion. As far as advancements in sciences, like you would like to have a lot of people would like to have us believe. The centralization of power and the monopolization of trade by the Egyptian hierarchy had such a deleterious effect upon progress that virtual stagnation ensued. Their civilization was stalling out. They weren't keeping up. Intermediate periods of aggression and peace ensued for the next 1,200 years. Now, what are intermediate periods of aggression? Intermediate periods are just that. It's what happens when a particular dynasty that has been in rule for a particular time, it collapses, it fails. Why? Something happens or disastrous happens where there's a war that breaks out. There's a loss of economic stability. Something happens where it causes that dynasty, that ruling dynasty, to fail. This is basically what is defined as an intermediate period in ancient Kemet. So anytime you see these intermediate period where they talk about this is an intermediate period in ancient Kemet, look for something disastrous or some unknown, whether it's the volcano eruption of the Themyscira, I was going to say Themyscira, I think that is it. That's how you say it. This eruption of this great volcano that we know that caused the collapse of a lot of civilizations. Let's talk about the impending wars with the Hittites, the impending wars with a lot of the Asiatic groups, a lot of civil wars that ensued. These things would cause periods in ancient Kemet to go into an economic collapse. Look for those things when you see the term intermediate period. Something like that is going to connect to it, right? So, again, during peaceful intervals, the Semitic peoples of Lower Canaan followed into the Delta region. These periods mark whatever advances in the cultures and advances during the 12th dynasty, roughly 2000 to 1800 BCE. Such a peaceful period developed. That's the 12th dynastic period. Now, what a lot of people don't like to talk about is that during the 12th dynastic period to the 17th dynastic period, that period of time, I believe, is known as the Hyksos rule. That's the period that is known as the Hyksos rule. An important Egyptian text, the tale of Sinew, right, is a lengthy account that illustrates the positive nature of the intercourse between Egyptians and Canaanites of the times. It took place during such a peaceful period that the reign of King Senuseret the first, 1971 to 1928 BCE. It relates to how the said Sinew, an Egyptian official of high rank, having fallen afoul of the law, fled to Retinue or Canaan. Right, this is what they call Canaan, the Retinue or Canaanites, or people in the Levant, hiding in the bushes and creeping around through fields by day. He slipped by the Egyptian frontier guards by night, only to suffer hunger and thirst in the Sinai desert. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Right? So he says, I was parched and my throat was dusty. I said, this is the taste of death. Just then, Sinew heard the lowing of cattle and came upon beasts being herded by Canaanites, headed by a kindly chief who had been in Egypt, the well-traveled Amu, the Semite, right? Which means he came out of Mesopotamia into Canaan. He's a Semite. Rescued Simeon, reviving the thirsty and famished fugitive with water and boiled milk. What they did for me was good, thankfully recorded Sinew. Sounds much like the story of Moses, doesn't it? Sounds much like the story of Moses when he kills the Egyptian slave and he has to flee and he goes over into Midian. We know Midian, they are Semitic people. They are Semites as well. Hold on one second, family. Hold on one second. Let me see here. Let me see real quick.
It's up to you, though. Tell me what you want to do so I can.
All right, family. I'm back. If you can hear me, put a one in the chat. Please hit that like button. Please like, share, and subscribe. Let me get back to what we were talking about here. All Again, it says, just then Sinew heard the Lord of cattle. We read that Sinew resided a year and a half in Canaan. A certain chieftain of Upper Canaan, right? Jethro was a chieftain, was he not? He was a chief of Midian, right? Or Ruel, as we know in the scripture, a chieftain of Upper Canaan. A certain chieftain of Upper Canaan, it says, Amishan, impressed with Sinew's reputation and character, has given him by Egyptian members of the Canaanites court, offered to take him into his service to teach his children, presumably, the Egyptian language. This also goes into the same context when we read about how Moses was learned in all the ways of the Egyptians, right? But let's keep reading. It says, thou wilt do well with me, and thou wilt hear the speech of Egypt, the Canaanite chieftain told Sinew, referring to other Egyptians in his service. Sinew was treated as one of the family, which he eventually became by marrying the chieftain's daughter. Is that not the story, the same context that we read about in the biblical narrative when it talks about Moses marrying the daughter of Ruel or Jethro, right? It says he was set up by the chieftain in style with his own estate, prosper, and in the rendition of his experience describes the land of Canaan. Sinew's description of Canaan is startlingly similar to the biblical description of the promised land. Figs were in it, Sinew wrote, and grapes. It had more wine than water, right? Remember when they sent the 12 spies goes down in the Canaan land to spy out the land? Moses sent Joshua and Caleb and and 10 others from the different tribes, and they say they're grapes. We see grapes as big as their heads, right? The scripture talks about the land flowing with milk and honey. This is all within the Egyptian story of Sinew. It says it had more wine than water. Plentiful was its honey, abundant its olives. Every kind of fruit was on its trees. Barley was there, and emmer, that's wheat. There was no limit of cattle. The positive relationship between the Canaanites and Egyptians of the period is likewise illustrated by the biblical story of Abraham. The parallel account is a clearly tribal memory of a propitious time in which, when drought afflicted Canaan, Canaanites were welcome to forage the animals in Goshen. Goshen is the area in which they call Avaris, right? Manfred Betek, an archaeologist who excavated the city of Avaris, equates this to the same area as Goshen. And Goshen, if you understand, is the same area in the biblical narrative in the book of Genesis where Joseph entreated the Pharaoh to allow his family to come and stay, allow them to stay in the land of Goshen or Goshen, the fertile region of the Nile Delta. Abraham's sojourn in Goshen would have taken place shortly after Sinew returned to Egypt. They're talking about the similarities to Abraham. But again, it says by the 19th century BCE, commercial traffic up the Nile had become a great boon to the monarchs of Upper Egypt, who not only traded with the passing entrepreneurs, but profited from customs collected from them all on their way to Nubia. But this is important, right? And the reason why this is important is because what we often see is let's see here, is not only who not only traded with the passing entrepreneurs, but what we see here in Goshen, in this particular area here, is that we see Israelites always being connected to this area. Always being connected to this area, but also being connected to Nubia. Right? Remember, we talked about earlier, it says one such prosperous baron named Imhotep had a 40-foot long mural painted in his tomb at the Bnei Hassam. And we talked about earlier the Bnei Hassam mural, right? About halfway to the Nile, Nubia, by commemorating the lucrative trade in his final resting place. Imhotep sought to assure an eternal traffic of tradesmen paying tribute to him in the afterworld. You see? So even in the so even the people of ancient Kemet, right? Even on the walls of Kemet, They wanted to capture this real life event. He wanted to, Imhotep was so entreated and made prosperous by the trade of the influx of the Amu, of the Asiatic people that were coming down out of Mesopotamia into ancient Kemet. He wanted to continue that wealth and prosperity in his afterlife once he died. So he had that scene painted on the B'nai Hussam mural. Why would he want to do that? Because this was something that actually happened in his real life. This is something that actually happened in his real life. We have to remember that, right? And so even when they talk about the 42 laws of Mayat, first of all, those are not laws. Excuse me, they actually are what they say they are. They are confessions. And these are things that this person had actually had done, not things that the person didn't do. I'm going to have to revisit that teaching. These are things that that person had actually done. And they were looking for the scribe to write them a spell in order to trick Osiris or Osar during the weighing of the heart ceremony, so that they can pass and go to the Amduat, or go to the Duat, or if I'm saying that correctly, to the place of the sea of reeds, or the place of rest, right? Which is also another interesting point when we talk about the Sea of Reeds, which is the place of rest in the Duat in ancient Kemet, that it's also where the biblical narrative tells you where the Israelites crossed. In the English translation, it says the Red Sea, but in the Hebraic understanding of that term Red Sea, if you go to the older Hebraic text, it says Sea of Reeds, or the Yom Suf, right? Or the Reed Sea. Why? Because that also had an understanding or a meaning of a place of rest. And them coming out of Egypt, the Israelites crossing the Sea of Reeds would have mean when they got to the other side of the Sea of Reeds, they would be at a place of rest, or the promised land. See, when they try to tell us that none of this stuff has existed, never existed, or that it wasn't real, the Bible's all made up, it was stolen and all this, they don't understand what they are reading. They just simply don't understand what they're reading. They don't. And so the painting evidently registered an actual event, which Imhotep felt worthy of internal repetition. It depicts a group of 37 Semites in full size in the act of paying custom duties to the nomarch's officials. A bold hieroglyphic text states that these Asiatics are supplying him with such important items as stibium, a mineral required for eye makeup, some type of charcoal-like substance, I believe it is, that was only found from fossils, I believe, in ancient Mesopotamia. But I have to look that up just to be 100% sure. Don't quote me on that. Right? But it can only be acquired in Mesopotamia. Imhotep eventually feared that the place he would occupy the hereafter might lack the mineral, as was the case in Egypt. The date given is the 4th year of Senusret II's rule, or at about 1892 BCE. Right? And absolutely, Professor Lovely Lady, she says, the problem, there are too many pretend scholars with no real research skills and simply a high school diploma less who are presenting false or misinformation, a serious issue. That is absolutely correct. And you can see it here with the B'nai Hussam mural here. I just wanted to show you here, right? And so I only wanted to be on an hour. The natives are getting restless around here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a part 3. and we're going to get into the connection between Joseph the Israelite and Imhotep. Peace and blessings, family. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this particular lesson and breakdown. Please share it. Bring back some subscribers with us. There's some things we want to do. So bring some subscribers with us, and we will see you this weekend. Look out for Brother KOT. Brother KOT is going to be coming through with some information. We actually have an announcement. Brother KOT and I, we're going to be announcing something, a new direction that the new Torah movement family is going to be moving forward with and looking to do. And so we really want to bring that out and present that to the people. And it's something that the family can be a part of it. And guess what? It doesn't cost you anything. Doesn't cost you anything. Only thing that we require that it costs is your sincerity of heart. That's the only thing that we are asking for. But we're going to be making this announcement coming up very soon. Peace and blessings to you. And again, shout out to Sister Professor Lovely Lady. Again, thank you for your words of wisdom and encouragement as always. I take it to heart and keep it to mind. Appreciate you as always. Please like, share, subscribe, family. I think I am going to be hosting the debate with Brother Sotomayor and Jabari in regards to the politics of the day. And also look out for it once it's dropped. It was supposed to be done the other day, but myself, Gorilla Hebrew, Napasha Davi did a debate on the historical Yeshua, Howard Jesus the Christ against Brother Jabari. We want to actually show that actual debate. I think a lot of people are going to be, they're going to be really taken back about what they heard during this particular debate. It's going to be very telling. So I'm waiting for Sonetta Studio. Shout out to Sonetta Studios. Sonetta. Once that video drops, I'm going to be bringing it over here, and we're going to be going through that particular debate because I think it's very important about some of the things that we're going to be discussing as well. So again, peace and blessings to you, family. And I will be back. Y'all hit the like button, subscribe, check for your notifications. Make sure you get for the notifications when we come on the air. Let us know if you're not getting them. But be checking out the channel for up and coming lessons and topics. Another lesson that I'm going to be bringing out, I think my next lesson that I'm working on right now, I'm going to be talking about how to celebrate the feast days today. How to celebrate the feast days, right? How to celebrate the holy days in the scripture. How do we do that today, right? Do we need to be slaughtering and cutting in the firstling, the sheep and halakha and doing all that? We're going to be talking about how you can do that today in a practical way in your home that the Most High has allotted us to do, right? So we're going to be showing us how to do that. Shout out to you, Brother What's in Pain. Peace and blessings to you, family. So we're going to be talking about that. It's an up and coming lesson. We're working on that as we speak. So Most High will, when I come back on, look for the notification. That'll probably be the next notification that you see. I also am preparing to do the part 2 on the feminine deity in the Bible as well. I'm looking to finish that up as well. There's a lot of information in that I definitely want to bring out. So be looking for that as well. So we have some things coming up that we definitely want to share and have you involved and be a part of. And so again, peace and blessings to your family. And with that, I will say, now unto him that is able to keep us from falling and to present us faultless before the presence of his glory with exceeding joy. To the only wise Yah, our Savior, be glory and majesty, dominion and power, both now and forever. Amen. Or we agree. That is Jude 24 and 25. Keep ascending, family. Peace.
Turn my mic up. Let it y'all rock. Before I move. Tell them dance on the ground. When I was here, the father radio, you made me go. And all my sins, he never gave me up. No. And all my wrongs, really gave me up. And heard him take up on that ground, so he had to rank them up. You told him, I don't enjoy. Going with that toy, baby.